The knife is old and could be dirty. It could give you blood poisoning. Please, let me do it. It's the oldest remedy in the world.
Oh, forget it. It's hardly worth mentioning. Just a little cut.
You know, it's only for the best.
This is Criteria.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Criteria, a special Halloween episode this time. Ooh. I'm Thomas Miras. I'm here with my friend James Majewski.
That's me.
This is our first one without a guest in a while, I think.
Yeah, and it's also our first video episode without a guest, I think.
Yes, it's our second video episode, and it's our first video episode in HD, because last time we did not check the video settings before we started recording. I think Nathan was in HD, but we weren't. But anyway,
Nathan's the filmmaker.
Yes, so exactly. So we're here to discuss, I think, the one horror film on the Vatican film list.
Yeah, Babette's Feast doesn't count.
No.
I mean, unless you think that she's a witch, and then it becomes the whole movie changes.
Right, exactly.
But we won't go there.
So
just listen to our first episode.
Yes. So Nosferatu. It's a film from 1922, silent film from the German director F.W. Murnau. And we're also actually going to be discussing, at least a little bit, an adaptation of this film that came out in, I believe, 1979 from the famous director Werner Herzog. Herzog believed this was the greatest German film ever made, and so he decided to make it again. But I actually really like his adaptation.
It was amazing.
When I used to hang out with you in, I guess, late teens, early 20s, you and me and maybe some of our other friends, you would always be trying to get us to watch some like really crazy horror film, and I would be like, no man, I'm not into this horror stuff, and sometimes you would succeed and sometimes you wouldn't. But I remember one occasion where maybe in our mid 24, 25, where we were with you and the Dusk Whales.
Yeah, there was just like a rebellion.
Well, yes, but I remember that we started watching something, and even you were like, "Wait a minute! Like, I haven't seen this in a while. This is like too messed up." You know.
No, the instance I was thinking of was on another occasion where it was like I just kept pressing, like, "No, just this is the worst part. If we just get through this," and then it got like even worse. I was like, "No, it gets better. Just trust me." And like at a certain point, everybody was just like, "No way, we're not having this. We're out."
Right.
Yeah. No, I've purged my horror library on several occasions, including very recently. So like I think just like a month or two ago, I went through again. Not that I have like a ton of horror films anymore, but there were like some leftovers, like some films that I just really got a kick out of when I was a teenager, and you take another look at them and it's like, but so maybe it's worth me saying like what I do appreciate about horror. Cause the first show that I was ever in was a horror show, actually. Way back when I first started acting, I did this show in DC it was at this great old spot called the Playbill.
I remember this. I don't think I made it, but are you talking about the Bloody Banquet?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So the show was at this great tavern. It was like this old theater haunt. called the Playbill, and they had a little black box theater in the back. We did our costume changes in the kitchen of the restaurant. So you're like changing costumes, and like waiters are coming through with like orders. Anyway, it was this little hole in the wall, and we did this horror show. I had to like go into this full face prosthetic. For most of the show, I was wearing a mask, and then I would do this reveal that would show just like how disfigured my face had become.
Right. That's cool.
And I've always loved that aspect of horror, the sort of like magic trick aspect to it, where you're grossing people out, you're scaring them with like blood packets that are hidden under your arm, or like a fake limb that's like stuffed into your shirt. You know, there's something that I really appreciate about the craft of like of pretend violence and of terrifying scenes. And I think that's evident. Like, I think that's at work. It's operating in this film, in Nosferatu, because, you know, that's probably the thing that's most terrifying about it. I don't think you can say that like the story is like particularly chilling, at least as it's presented, or that there's like an atmosphere of dread, but it's the imagery and it's the sort of magic trick that of the magic tricks that are executed on screen with Nosferatu like disappearing into thin air, or you know, like him like with superhuman strength like carrying these coffins and then getting into one and the coffin magically closing, you know, doors magically opening, and then of course like his prosthetics and his makeup, the teeth,
his hands,
the hands, and how he carries himself, right? These are all like images that are just straight out of a nightmare.
Yeah,
you know?
They're haunting.
Yeah,
they're haunting. You know, it's like a slow burn kind of thing with this.
Well, what was, you said, you were telling me that your initial experience of this was like filled with laughter.
Yeah. I mean, I was watching it with a couple other guys, and it's I think it's easier, especially with silent films, to like comment, and if you're with other people, rather than like sort of like making an effort to like put yourself in the right frame of mind to like, you know, to like point out like the sillier or like more time bound elements. But so that was my first experience, and that's partially why I found the Werner Herzog version scarier. But before we get into the details, though, like, how do you think horror functions? Like, what or not how do you think it functions, but what do you think its function is?
Yeah,
you know,
I think that it's similar to how Aristotle describes tragedy, you know, as like achieving this
purgative
like, thing. Like the catharsis or whatever. So this is one of the other things that always attracted me about horror, is that, you know, on my day to day, especially when I was in high school, you know, you might feel any number of intense emotions, you know, when you're a teenager, whether it's like excitement or romance or whatever, but horror, not so much. You know, there was something delightful in the same way that like a roller coaster is exciting. You're putting yourself into this totally artificial environment that's sort of crafted to deliver this thrill, you know, of like this danger, these death-defying stunts that you're put through on a roller coaster that you would never experience under any other context. And if you did, like if you were in a car accident or something, it would be like deadly terrifying, if not traumatic, you know? And I think similarly with horror films, like what's always been appealing to me is that I can feel that feeling, you know, of just being scared, but know that I'm safe, you know, that there isn't actually anything that is scary. Hopefully, right? That there isn't anything that is actually traumatizing. But I will say, you know, that I've seen some horror films that I wish I could forget, you know? So that's where it's tricky, because I think that with film, there is a real potential to traumatize with the kind of imagery that you show, especially when it gets into, pornographic imagery, which is something that is definitely used a lot in horror. It's kind of a commonplace, unfortunately.
Yeah, so that's an interesting point about like the use of imagery that can traumatize, because there's like a number of different aspects to it, right? So there's the aspect of the demonic and the occult, which we could discuss. There's aspects of like, and then in terms of like violence or just disturbing things, there's also an aspect of like, first of all, what you're showing and kind of like its intrinsic qualities and like how it treats its subject matter, and then also the effect that it has on the viewer. And the two, I think maybe sometimes people make too much of an effort to separate those two things. But they are distinct, I think.
I've run myself in circles, like trying to get my head around this so many times before, to try to come up with like some clear principles. And there are some, certainly anything that's pornographic is just out the window.
Right.
But even there, there are instances of nudity in film that aren't, right? So there is aren't pornographic, I should say. So, so there is there does have to be, I think, a consultation of the spirit of the film, There has to be a kind of prudential discernment of what's going on. So in the case of occult subject matter, like The Exorcist is one of my favorite horror films. I think it's awesome. And in general, I like to stay away from things that have to do with the occult, especially if they're kind of flippant treatments.
Right.
So what really bothers me is the closer a film gets to the pretense of like a real demon or a real portrayal of the occult,
and yet the spirit underlying it is still flippant somehow.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So
that's your objection to Ari Aster, essentially.
Right,
isn't it?
right. So you sent me this interesting article
by Sohrab Ahmari. I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name right, but he's a relatively recent Catholic convert. He writes for the New York Post. Has a book or two out,
and he has a lot of great stuff to say about the arts. I appreciate his voice, as he's not a Philistine, but he's also clearly a faithful man. And he has this interesting article on Ari Aster's work where he kind of vindicates it as, pointing out this particular decline in Western culture of the father.
Yeah. And we're just for people who don't know who that is, Ari Aster. The recent films, he's only done 2 films.
I think so.
Hereditary, and then Midsummer, which both are from A24 Studios, I think. That's made a lot of these kind of modern, more artsy seeming horror films in the past few years.
Yeah. So his films are very violent, and both of them deal with aspects of the occult.
Right.
And where Ari Aster would find a warning and a cautionary tale in both of these films about the direction that our culture is heading in its sort of re-paganization and its resentment toward the father, I find a celebration of those things.
You mean where Sohrab Ahmari would find those?
Sorry, my bad. Yeah. That's basically what Sohrab Ahmari says about Ari Aster's work, in a kind of an effort to vindicate it.
Right.
But I think that if you really are sort of alert to the spirit that's driving these films, it strikes me not as one that's like cautionary and giving a sort of due reverence, again, if you can even use that word in talking about this material, but sort of like a due seriousness or gravity, a soberness, in dealing with this.
It's like when people say like, oh, there's pornography out there that like respects women and like,
Yeah, well, so like The Exorcist, there's no question that evil is evil, and good is good. But with Ari Aster's films, it's a little... Those distinctions are a little blurry, I think. So
maybe especially because it has... I haven't seen that, but from what I understand, people take a political kind of cultural criticism undercurrent to them that makes some of these things ambiguous.
Yeah, another interesting recent horror film, if we can just talk about it before getting into Nosferatu, is The Witch.
Right.
A New England folktale. Did you see that one?
I'll probably never watch it. It looks too scary, but plenty of people I trust say that it was really good and substantive.
It is very scary, and again, dealing with sort of New England folklore surrounding witches, and really, really kind of presenting just how terrifying this image was to this early American community.
Right.
I think that there is like a due reverence granted there, and so you can watch that film in good faith, I think, and not get confused. And yet, even there, a lot of people coming out of that film sort of applauded it as like a celebration of witchcraft, or a sort of new feminist kind of narrative. And I thought, like, wow, that's a really scary response, first off, but also one that I don't think is totally justified by the film, because I think that for anybody who's seen it, like, it's quite tragic.
Sometimes feminists will like take the villain and be like,
Yeah.
the villain of this film is a feminist hero.
Yeah.
And it's like,
yeah, well,
it's weird.
Yeah, you gotta wonder. So Nosferatu maybe we can just dive right into that.
Okay.
And we can touch on more of these questions as we go along.
Well, I can say right off the bat, I am a huge fan of Bram Stoker's novel Dracula. I've only read it once. I don't read a lot of like the great novels, but if I had to list my top 5, 3 of them would be novels I've only read once. 2 of them in high school, but they're still great. Dang it!
See, I also read the novel, but I can't remember anything of it because it was so long ago.
It's been maybe 5 years since I read the novel,
Okay.
but I was just so I was really blown away. I didn't expect it to be as great and like as deep and as beautiful and like spiritual as it is. The author was not Catholic. I don't know what he was. Maybe a Protestant of some kind. But it's very Catholic. It draws on so much sacramental, not just imagery, but themes. And, there it's very clear. We have so many vampire films and novels and video games, and they've all done their own twist on what a vampire is. I remember I watched that movie. There's a TV show of it now, What We Do in the Shadows. What We Do in the Shadows is a Spinal Tap-esque. It's basically the Spinal Tap of vampire movies.
Yeah.
It's hilarious. It's as done as well as you could want. I don't remember like everything that's in the film, so like don't freak out if it like has a crude joke in it or something. But it's like as well as you could expect that type of mockumentary approach to. It's like 4 vampires living in a house together, like an old creepy house.
That's
and
cool.
like just like butting heads against each other as roommates.
Yeah.
And it's great. But there's one part in the film where the vampire sees a crucifix and he's like freaking out, and it's played for laughs. And I'm like, okay, so like there's a limit to how much you can play this vampire thing for laughs and be faithful to the original lore. Some things, some vampire stories kind of like abstract from the kind of like Christian spiritual trappings of the original vampire lore, meaning basically Bram Stoker, because I don't know about like the real folkloric elements prior to him.
Yeah.
In Bram Stoker, vampires are, if not demons, they're like quasi-demonic. Maybe they're possessed. I'm not sure. I don't remember that well. In Nosferatu, the 1922 film, and I guess in Werner Herzog's too, they're referred to as descendants of Belial, meaning Satan, basically. And in the novel, the weapons, many of the weapons against vampires are not prayer per se.
Sacramentals.
Yeah, I think there's prayer in the book, but yeah, like holy water. And specifically Catholic, and I don't think any of these characters are Catholic, which is what's interesting.
Yeah.
Maybe Dr. Van Helsing is Catholic, I can't remember. He might be like a Dutch Catholic or something, but, at one point, and it's the symbolism that matters here, not the kind of like whether you would actually use the Eucharist in this way.
Yeah.
But like at one point in the novel, and this is in Herzog's adaptation from 1979 as well, it said like, well, they can't stand the Eucharist, so like they crumble bits of Eucharistic wafers, consecrated hosts, around this grave in which Dracula spends his days hiding out, so that he can't get out, or it's so that he can't escape back into it. I forget. But yeah, so it's like very explicitly Catholic, and also in the novel, there's just so much about like virtue and like purity of heart and at least implicitly chastity. And all these things,
Right.
and it's very, very beautiful, very uplifting, and I kind of take it for granted that like there's just not going to be a movie that fully conveys this.
Sure.
So
kind of like Lord of the Rings.
yeah, but more so. I mean, you could make a movie that conveys this, but I don't know that any vampire movie has. So in Nosferatu, I'm just kind of using the spiritual elements as a jumping point here because we've been talking about the demonic and stuff in horror. In the 1922 film by F.W. Murnau, you get basically the negative side only of the spiritual stuff. Not that it's celebrated, but what I'm saying is that you get the fact that he's quasi-demonic. He's a descendant of Belial. Mm-hmm. You don't get the cross. You don't really get the holy water. You don't get the Eucharist.
Yeah, that's right.
So the negative parts are emphasized, and the only weapon against him that's retained in the film is that he can be like distracted by the blood of an innocent, I guess not a virgin, but an innocent woman, until the cock crows and he gets hit by the sun and crumbles into dust. In the Herzog version, it's kind of weird because there's some lines of dialogue that are kind of like vaguely existentialist and implicitly critical of faith, maybe, but he also has all those elements. So, an old villager in Transylvania, the innkeeper's wife, gives our main character a rosary around his neck to protect him. She sprinkles him with holy water. She makes the sign of the cross as he's going up to the mountain to Dracula's castle. He, the whole Eucharist thing that I mentioned, that's in Herzog's film. Mm-hmm. So all those elements are retained, even though it's less of a triumphant ending than in the 1922 Nosferatu. By the way, can we just establish, please, let's use the names from Herzog's version to refer to, because they changed as I mentioned, they changed all the names in the Murnau. I can't remember half of them. The only one I remember is that instead of Dracula, he's Count Orlok, which is cool and memorable.
Yeah.
But other than that, the main...
I think in the Murnau it's Hutter, and then in Nosferatu, in Herzog's it's Jonathan.
Jonathan Harker. These are names from the novel.
In the Murnau it's Locke, and in Herzog's it's Renfield. And then in the Murnau it's Ellen, and in Herzog's it's Lucy.
Yeah.
I think.
Although in the book, his wife is Mina and the friend is Lucy, but he switched it around, the names around. Anyway, and then there's the Van Helsing, I forget what he's called, the doctor who helps them. Also, Dr. Van Helsing in the book is way cooler and more effective, and like gives them all the stuff about the Eucharist and the spiritual remedies. In the first film, he hardly makes an impression, in my opinion. And in the second film, he's like the opposite of what he is in the book, which is in the second film he functions as this modern rationalist, Enlightenment scientist who's in denial about any of the supernatural things that are happening.
Both of those, I think that theme is operating in both films, mm-hmm. in the Murnau and in the Herzog. There is this kind of opposition between an Enlightenment rationalism and, kind of demonstrating its ineptitude at addressing this problem, the vampire problem. I think that you could say that Nosferatu is a parable about, like the limits of human science and its ability to master nature. Mm-hmm. That there's more in heaven and earth than are contained in your philosophy, Horatio. you know.
Yeah.
But I think that Van Helsing operates in that way, maybe with like a different angle, but I think he's functioning in that way in both films. Because in the first film, in Murnau's, we're introduced to Van Helsing when he's like showing his students these different creatures from nature.
I'm mind melding with you right now. I think I know where you're getting at, but
Well,
please continue.
You know, it's first there's the Venus flytrap,
Yeah.
and we see, you know, an image of a fly flying into the flytrap. Murnau captures this on camera, and then it eating it. Then later he shows this polyp that's like attacking like another thing, and it's like we're looking through the microscope. It's a really kind of beautiful image, actually.
Yeah, it's pretty cool especially for such an early film.
Yeah, and especially considering that probably for a lot of audiences seeing this film, this is the first time they're seeing anything like that.
Yeah.
Maybe a lot of people, it's the first time they're seeing a Venus flytrap at all, like not even aware that such a plant existed.
Right.
You know, but then also in the film, a few scenes later, we see Renfield or Locke. Oh man, this is gonna get confusing.
I just call him the estate agent. Renfield is the guy who's secretly a servant of Dracula. He's the boss of our main character, Jonathan Harker, and he's the guy who gets the letter from Dracula saying, I want to buy a house in this town, and sends Jonathan Harker up the mountain in Transylvania to go sell the house.
All real estate agents, okay?
No, because there's another. No,
good.
because in both films there's another real estate agent in the room who's like a little weirded out by his like antics.
This won't be easy. May take you a long time. Cost you a lot of sweat. And possibly also a bit of blood.
Well, anyway, we cut to him in his prison, and he's like, look, a spider. And we see another shot of a spider wrapping up its prey, right? So I think that like Van Helsing is aware in this film of the violence in nature.
He in this film he bridges the two. He draws a connection between the supernatural and the natural, whereas in Herzog's adaptation he denies any such connection.
Right. Yeah, that's right. Kind
of interesting.
It is. And I think I think that like that the sort of perennial allure of this tale is located there, you know, that like that Nosferatu, he's like from the old world, you know. I mean, this film takes place in Germany, but like even there it's like you got to go to Transylvania, you know. It's like way out there, it's up this mountain, you know.
Old world in the sense of like medieval, pre-modern, not geographical.
Yeah. Well, I mean, for us, you know, as Americans,
well, it's Eastern Europe, so it's less modern. Than
yeah. So
Germany.
that's what I'm getting at, is that there's like something primeval, you know. There's something that's like that modern man has forgotten, and that is going to come up to bite him. And I think that it's interesting that the film both films couple this with a plague.
Well, that's what I was going to mention, is because you mentioned earlier horror as being something that is connected to, it's like things that we wouldn't normally experience. That's why it's kind of interesting, and my first reaction was not to like it, but in both films, yes, it's connected to a plague with all these rats that Dracula brings with him when he comes to town. He comes to Germany. And I don't remember if that was in the book at all, to be honest. But yeah, it's kind of interesting because it's this naturalistic thing, but it's clearly not like reducing Dracula to being a bringer of plague.
Right.
It's much more like these are the evils that come in his wake.
Yes.
Kind of thing.
Yeah, and you know, like I think that whatever you may or may not think about the coronavirus and whether it can even hold a candle to any plague of
Thanks
the past.
for humoring me.
No, I look, man, I'm over it, you know. But I think that it's worth mentioning that like here we are in our own kind of pandemic, even if it is a bit of a milquetoast pandemic, and I think we're faced with these same questions, right? So can we reduce this to just strictly something that's happening on the biological order,
Right.
on the microscopic order,
Yeah.
or is there something more fundamental, more old world? You know?
Yeah, that's interesting. One of the things with these films, especially the original film, because they remove so much of the, in my opinion, they remove so much of the, maybe even the agency, but certainly the spiritual elements of the struggles of the good guys.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder, like, is there much to draw? How much is there to draw thematically from? Herzog tries to put some like existentialist like nonsense in there. I feel like he sprinkles a little bit of nonsense into every one of his films, but it's almost more noticeable with the fictional films because you expect to hear his point of view in a documentary.
Yeah.
Taking a close look at what's around us, there is some sort of a harmony. It is the harmony of overwhelming and collective murder.
For me, like stuff about plagues and like the old world and like the unknown, this stuff that like isn't so like directly connected to the human heart always strikes me as like a little more thin thematically than the stuff that's like fully integrated into the moral struggle of man and
totally.
like love and all this stuff that is so central to the book.
Yeah, right. So
like how much does 1922's film operate on more than just like a creepy movie?
Yeah.
Is like a high level creepy movie.
I don't think it does a lot more than that. But I think that if you're able to watch that film with the kind of like childlike wonder that we've talked about when talking about silent films, this is the second silent film that we've watched on this podcast.
Right.
And there is like a certain childlikeness that I think the silent film invites because we're not being like titillated by so much of the spectacle that we're used to. We're seeing film in its early days, but then there's like almost like an extra delight that comes from seeing the kinds of spectacle that they are able to pull off. So like this iconic scene of Nosferatu rising from the coffin, right? They're just like like
right.
With no strings attached,
Yeah.
Like humans can't do that. They need to like climb out of coffins, but this guy just did it.
I could probably do it.
It's 1922, and I've never seen anything.
When I get out
like
of the
that.
bathtub, I like try to just.
Well, I think that like, up until this point, we've seen the human race has seen horrific imagery in, etchings or paintings, or stories, or perhaps on the stage. But like to see a moving picture, of this like demonic looking entity.
Rat looking.
Yeah, there's like some really scary.
Yeah, I was just thinking of Stephen King. I don't know to what degree these films can be compared to the film of The Shining, but Stephen King's novels, are much closer in their like emotional and human and moral core to the novel of Dracula.
Mm-hmm.
Because so much of the horror and so much of the pathos and terror of the films has to do with the human situations. And Stephen King's novels, from what I can remember, there's never just human beings encountering. Look, in Nosferatu by Murnau, you get human beings, la-di-da-di-da, oh, horrible creatures, In Stephen King's, you get like flawed, struggling human beings, and so much of the grief. There's as much grief and sorrow as there is terror and horror in his films because they're also dealing with their own pre-existing human problems.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like the moral struggle is as much, and the purity of heart elements are as much central as the supernatural or the abnormal horror elements.
Sure.
So I guess that's what appeals to me more.
Yeah.
I like to be appealed to at the level of the heart.
Yeah. Totally. Yeah, I mean, I think that Herzog's Nosferatu inches toward that a little bit more, while still retaining a lot of what made the original great. Like, I think that talking about adaptation, like Herzog's Nosferatu, I think is a textbook excellent adaptation. It's faithful to the spirit of the original. It remakes so much. There's some shots that are almost like shot for shot remakes. Yeah. But it also, it's willing to make departures from the source material too, and he does, and he changes a lot, I think, to greater effect after seeing Herzog's. So it's really kind of across the board, like it does everything an adaptation ought to do. It's like, careful to preserve what was great about the original, but also transforming it in exciting ways, and then redounding to an even better appreciation for what came before.
Yeah, which one of the striking aspects of Herzog's adaptation is that to what degree it is, he does add things, but the degree to which it's so faithful, almost shot for shot in many cases, and going back to the same locations and using similar architecture and stuff to the original, and yet either changes it in some ways, or in many cases, I think just makes it more evocative, just more atmospheric.
It. Yeah, think about that moment when Jonathan first gets to the castle and he cuts his finger. Oh yeah. And then there's like this almost like death tango between him and Nosferatu, right? Where Jonathan is backing up and Nosferatu is sort of having him like held in like a spell. Their eyes are locked. That's repeated from Murnau's film into Herzog's film, but it's sort of imbued with a logic that that makes it more believable. Like we're just with slight gestures, somehow it like deepens.
There's two big differences in these two characters between the films. I would say on the level of writing on the level of character, the bigger difference is with Jonathan. He's a frivolous idiot dandy in the Murnau film. Yeah. He's much more serious and angsty. Yeah. Played wonderfully by Bruno Ganz. Yes. In Herzog's version, Nosferatu, is not maybe fundamentally different, but he's just deepened. Yeah. His motivations aren't really changed, but they are just there more, and so much of it is not just in the writing. Of course, he's given a lot more lines and sort of philosophy, and he talks about being lonely for hundreds of years and stuff. So he's made a little sympathetic in a weird way.
Herzog is basically a vampire. Yeah. Just like, I could see Herzog being deeply, deeply sympathetic to Nosferatu.
Right.
I don't attach importance to sunshine anymore, or to glittering fountains, which youth is so fond of. I love the darkness and the shadows, where I can be alone with my thoughts. I am the descendant of an old family. Time is an abyss, profound as 1,000 nights. Centuries come and go. To be unable to grow old is terrible. Death is not the worst. There are things more horrible than death. Can you imagine enduring centuries, experiencing each day the same futile things?
Herzog's muse, Klaus Kinski, I read, people commenting he was born to play a vampire. Yeah. But it's so much more soulful. It's more soulful. It's more emotional. It's more intelligent in the eyes. Yeah. You can see his motivation. And then when you talk about the scenes that are the most animalistic, because he's very animalistic in Murnau's version, the scenes that are most like that in Herzog's version, you can see the lust
Yeah.
much more.
Yeah, he still plays it with real intensity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So soulful, sure, but also you can just see the
Vicious.
eroticism
Yeah.
of it
Yeah.
in this scene, and most of all in the scene where he sucks the blood of this Snow White.
Oh my gosh,
maiden
I like can
at the
still
end of the
feel
film.
it in my neck. Yeah.
Very intense, very unsettlingly kind of erotic.
Yeah.
And it's pretty remarkable performance and framing and everything else.
Both films
Yeah.
are really beautiful films.
Yeah.
I mean, that was something that struck me on my first viewing of the Murnau, and then again watching the Herzog, and then deepened on my second viewing of the Murnau. Is like, especially the landscape shots in both films. In both films, the whole sequence of Jonathan heading up the mountain to the castle, you really get the sense of like, we're being transported to another world, you know? And that's made explicit, I think, in the Murnau, when we get this long sequence. It's not long, it's maybe just a few seconds, but it's a shot of the carriage, but it's in the negative.
Right, it's going through the woods.
Yeah, but it's like
Very cool
he's also
shot.
crossing the river Styx, you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
he's going into another plane.
The creepiest moments in Murnau's version were, for me, the most unusual shots. In particular, also the scene in Murnau's where he's sucking the blood, or about to suck the blood of Lucy, Ellen.
Yeah.
There's this shot, and if you're watching on YouTube, you'll be able to see this shot.
We'll show it.
It's just, and what's cool about it is the creepiness is as much due to the composition as to the acting or the makeup or any of that, and the light and dark. His head is like in the corner of the frame. It's like, it's not like you would miss it, but
he's lurking.
Yeah.
You know? I mean, and that's what evil does. It lurks.
You
in
like
the
just
shadows.
see his head and like maybe his hands in the dark, and it's just this amazing composition.
Because fundamentally, this is a story about the things that go bump in the night.
Right.
You know, it's about nightmares. Like they have dreams and they're troubled by their dreams, and they're not sure what's real. And
that's why he doesn't chase people. That's why he doesn't run fast. He doesn't overpower you physically, really.
Yeah.
In both films, he almost hypnotizes you. He moves slower, and he paralyzes his victim all the more the slower he moves.
Yeah.
Almost.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
It's so intense. The scene where I guess it's technically the second time he sucks Jonathan's blood, but it's the first time we actually see him. In the first time, he falls asleep in the chair and then wakes up with bite marks on his neck. Second time, he's in bed, and this is when Lucy is having the vision of this, where she is in Germany. And you see him approaching, and it's intensified in Herzog's version. But yeah, he just comes through the doorway, and he's just moving so slowly.
Yeah. It looks like he's gliding.
And he almost, I think it's ambiguous to what degree he has like seductive power. Because in the scene in Herzog's, as much eroticism as there is in the kind of climactic blood-sucking scene, because she's trying to get him to stay there so that he'll get caught by the sun in the morning, it's ambiguous to what degree like he actually has power over her psychologically.
Yeah. Well,
but
I think that
he definitely wants to.
But I think that it actually is pointing to something that's true about evil, in that like, sometimes we just freeze when we're confronted with something that's really diabolical.
Right.
I think that this is not uncommon in cases of abuse, where someone comes into your room at night, and what are you going to do? Some people, their fight or flight mode kicks in.
Right.
But sometimes it's just being frozen. We're not equipped to confront the evil,
Wow.
And
yeah,
and
that's a great point.
And I think that it happens, in perhaps more subtle ways in our day to day as well. I mean, heck, I think about, a lot of times when I'm on the New York City subway, sometimes you just get tense and freeze up and please don't look at me, And I don't know what I'll do if you do look at me. I think that this also sort of dovetails with what we're talking about with like the pandemic, and a tendency to try to reduce evil to sort of like a materialistic or a rationalistic reduction of these things. It's just being ill prepared for when evil really does rear its face. It creeps there in the shadows. It's there in the dark. The way that light and dark is used in both of these films, perhaps more prominently in Nosferatu, in Murnau's Nosferatu, where there's things that we're blind to, but how will we respond when they appear?
Yeah, we have to wrap up in a minute here, but I wish we had more time to talk about the aesthetic of especially Herzog's film, because it's a really gorgeous, so evocative. Also in the sound when he's in Dracula's castle, it's very evocative. The ambience of it is very evocative. A number of things that he added had to do with the plague, and there's these incredible scenes of the town square, where most of the town seems to have died out from the plague. There's people dancing, despairing in despair, and it evokes the ring around the rosy thing, which, as I understand, has origins.
Yeah,
in
like
plague.
The dance macabre.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And then there's these people sitting at a table in the town square, and they're surrounded by rats are surrounding their feet, and there's a lot of rats in this movie, and and they're eating this feast, and they invite Lucy to sit with them. Like, we all have the plague, so we're just enjoying what time we have left, and then it cuts off of them, and then it cuts back to the table, and they're all gone, and the entire table is covered by rats that are swarming the leftover food.
Yeah, well, I couldn't not think about the coronavirus when I was watching both films.
Yeah.
It's just where we are. And I couldn't not think about how society has been responding, and how we've collectively become frozen, maybe hypnotized, by death, that lurks beneath.
Join us, please.
It's our last supper. We've all caught the plague. We must enjoy each day that's left.
What do you think about the fact that Herzog has the film end differently? In both, Dracula is killed.
Yeah.
But in one, and I guess Lucy dies in both, Jonathan gets sick from being... Herzog restores an element of vampire lore here, where Jonathan is becoming a vampire because he's been feasted on sufficiently by Dracula, and he returns home, but he's just sitting there. He's sickly, he's pale, and at the end, right after Dracula is killed, he basically is like taken over, and he tricks the maid into sweeping the Eucharist out. I guess Lucy knows what's happening because she surrounds him with Eucharist fragments in his chair in the corner. He has the maid sweep this dust up, and then kind of sidesteps and gets out of there. And the last shot of the film is his. For some reason, this is accompanied by a Sanctus in the soundtrack. The last shot of the film is his riding away off into the fog on the beach. Why do you think Herzog has done this to us?
I mean, I think it's because Herzog is in despair. I mean, even for me with my postmodern sensibility, there was something dissatisfying about the ending of the Murnau. I was ready to be devastated by Lucy's death, and that's why I feel like I remember that she didn't die, because it was so striking to me that he would forego that kind of a choice. That for evil to be defeated and everything to be okay, that can't possibly be the way
she
this
doesn't
ends.
die in the Murnau.
It's definitely disappointing in Herzog's, and the disappointment is compounded by Jonathan's turn to the dark side.
Yeah, but on an aesthetic level, I can say I like Herzog's adaptation better.
Yeah, I think that I like Herzog's. I think that Herzog approves on the film in almost every respect, but I also think that he does so lovingly, so that, you know, like even like the kittens at the beginning of the movie, right? Herzog spends some time with these kittens that he's imported into his film from the Murnau. Like the first time we see Ellen in the Murnau film, she's playing with a kitten, you know, and it's something you can so easily overlook, but you get the sense that Herzog has really considered that moment, you know, and really delighted in it and seen something in these kittens.
Yeah.
You know, that's just one example, but it really plays out through the whole film. So,
yeah.
So while I think that Herzog does improve on the film and deepen it in a lot of ways, and I think that Klaus Kinski's performance maybe even is more iconic.
Yeah.
That it's still all so lovingly done that you can return to the original and really, I think, find even more in there to delight in.
Both of these films are currently streaming on the Criterion Channel, both versions of Nosferatu.
Right. And in fact, I'll say that if you're going to watch the Murnau, I'm going to pick out my pen. I'll say that if you're going to watch the Murnau...
You didn't need that.
It's my prop, you know? If you're going to watch the Murnau, definitely watch it on the Criterion Channel. I watched it the first time on Amazon Prime. Big mistake.
Oh, that wasn't even YouTube? I figured it was YouTube. Okay.
No. I watched like one that was like on Amazon.
The version on Criterion has really great colors. Yes, there's colors in silent film, as we talked about before. And it's got... It's better image, and it's got a great soundtrack, which I'm guessing is an adaptation of the original score written for live performance along with a silent film.
Yeah,
it's a serious orchestral
The one
score.
I watched, no color, terrible score. It wasn't even like it was just bad. And then also some intertitles were missing, some scenes were clipped weirdly. So definitely catch the version on the Criterion Channel. It's great. And then you can make it a double feature and watch the Herzog.
Indeed, yes. So this film is supposedly a German expressionist film, and we didn't touch on that at all. But I think that's okay. That's okay because it's barely a German expressionist film. Basically every characteristic I read about that German expressionism has, this film doesn't have.
I also was expecting to see more of it because it's so played up as
I think maybe more thematically than visual style.
Yeah.
But we're gonna watch Metropolis before too long. I think that's more of an exemplar of that style. So we'll get into that. I will say for this episode being a discussion of horror as well as these films, I don't know that these films are, you know, as much ideal material for a discussion of like what horror can do as we could get to. I hope maybe at some point we'll get a chance to discuss a film that will get us deeper into that.
Yeah.
But you know, classics be classics, yo.
Yeah, and I think that we've seen so far.
Cringe, but
I think we've seen so far that the Vatican film list is trying to incorporate representative films from these different genres. Yeah. And it would be incomplete if it didn't have like some kind of horror film on there.
Yeah. So I guess our next film, Fantasia, right?
That's right. We're going to be doing Fantasia, and we're going to be doing it with special guest Tim Reckert, a friend of mine from Los Angeles. He's a director, a filmmaker, perhaps most known for The Star.
Yeah, he directed The Star. It's an animated film about the Nativity, correct?
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, we're looking forward to that, and have a good election, I guess.
Oh, no.
Thank you guys for listening. Please, if you're watching this on YouTube...
Talk about a horror movie.
If you're watching this on YouTube, please click that old subscribe button, and that's it. God bless you all, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Happy Halloween!